Welcome to this week's road test review on AutoEV. You're probably wondering why I've got the Jaguar I-Pace here, because it's not new. In fact, in terms of EVs, it's almost pensionable. The car was launched in 2018 and it was 2 years after its launch in 2020 when we first did our first road test review, and we also pitched it against the EV6 from Kia last year as a used car. So why have you clicked on this video to see a road test review on a car that's 5 years old? This isn't even a facelifted one. There's going to be a facelifted car this year at some point, a 2024 model. This isn't it. So it's not some secret first glimpse that we've managed to get hold of from Jaguar. This is the same I-Pace that you've been able to buy since 2018. But the reason that I wanted to do a road test review on this car was very, very simple. You see, up until now, I've always said that it's my money no object EV. I think this is one of the best EVs you can buy. In fact, up to the point Porsche launched the Taycan Cross Turismo, this would have been my choice. And the thing with the Jaguar I-Pace is, because it's now 5 years old, as we know, the EV world moves very fast. Back in 2018 when it was launched, there really wasn't a lot of competition out there. I mean, Audi was just about to bring out the e-tron, and Mercedes were the same with the EQC 400, but it still wasn't quite there yet. But now there is a huge amount of competition. And Jaguar have, well, shall we say, they're kind of standing still a little bit. So I wanted to know if the I-Pace is still worthy of your consideration 5 years after its launch in the face of much newer competition, and do I still hold it in such high regard? Well, there was only one way to do that, and that was to bring it on a road trip to Scotland. So, welcome to Scotland, welcome to the old Jaguar I-Pace, and as always, welcome to AutoEV. Now, before we get started on this week's road test review of the old Jaguar I-Pace, it is of course that time where I'm going to ask you to make sure you're subscribed to the AutoEV channel. And then once you've done that, press the little bell button that's down below, because then that way you'll be notified of when our next video is uploaded and goes live. Once you've watched the video, if you do enjoy it, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And as always, the comment section down below, let us know what your thoughts on the channel and of course on the cars that we review. Do you have a Jaguar I-Pace? What's your thoughts on it? What's your experiences with it? Are you looking perhaps at this place in the market space, and have you been considering an I-Pace and want to know a bit more about it? Well, as always, do let us know down in the comments. So why have I brought a Jaguar I-Pace to Scotland? Well, it's as simple as this. You see, as I said, it's always been the car that I've said is my kind of money no object EV, right up until the point that Porsche launched the Taycan Cross Turismo. But we were having a conversation in the AutoEV office the other day, and Rod said to me, he said, is it still worthy of a consideration? And we know that the EV market moves really quickly, and with the I-Pace being 5 years old now, is it still a car you would really consider in the face of competition such as the new updated Audi Q8 e-tron, Mercedes EQC 400, BMW iX, and of course the Taycan? He says, so why don't you take one on a good road trip and see if it's still got that sprinkle of magic, see if it still tickles your pickle like it used to. So here we are, back in Scotland to answer those questions. Is the I-Pace still worthy of your consideration? But before we move on, it's probably worthwhile taking a little snapshot and reminding ourselves of what the I-Pace actually is. Well, as I say, it was Jaguar's first all-new electric car launched back in 2018. And believe it or not, despite its styling, it is marketed as a mid-size premium SUV. It has a WLTP range of just over 300 miles, and it's at a price point from around about £70,000 all the way up to just over £90,000, depending on the specification and the trim level that you choose. But here's the thing, should you choose it? Should you still be considering an I-Pace, given the fact there is a huge amount of new competition out there? Well, the only way we're going to find out is by putting it through the road test that you car buyers out there actually trust when it comes to make a decision on your new EVs, and that is of course the AutoEV one. Well, let's kick off with styling, because, well, look at it, why would you not? I think this has to be Jaguar's best looking car since the original E-Type. Now, Jaguar is a brand. Let's just quickly give us a little bit of a history lesson when it comes to Jaguar, because there was a time when they were just seen as a bit of an old man's car. I think they thought that retro styling was the kind of way forward. And it never used to be that way. If you look back to the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, with cars such as the XK120, the XK140, the XK150, the E-Type, the XJ6, the XJS of 1970s, and I don't care what you say, that is a real standout car. That was way ahead of its time, and it was very much misunderstood, the XJS. And only now people are looking back thinking, that's a good looking car. But to my eyes, this is right up there with the E-Type as one of the best looking cars that Jaguar has actually ever produced. I think it's an absolute stunning car. And again, a bit like I've always said, if you can launch a car today that's as old as this and it still looks fresh and it still looks this good, then its design is absolute on point and it's a real classic. I love the way the I-Pace looks. I think it's the best look. I think it's one of the best looking cars on the road, let alone one of the best looking EVs, not even just the best SUV. Look at it. Ian Callum took away all that kind of retro styling and brought the brand right up to date. He's kind of angry, cowled headlights with the kind of the J-shaped DRLs running through there. Now the car does have a grille, which is a bit odd because you don't need it, but it was kind of Jaguar signature. Now the new 2024 model car is going to have all that filled in, whereas here it's a sort of mock grille. But there is a significant bit of styling here because just under there is an airflow sort of spoiler. The airflow goes in there and comes out there at the top of the bonnet to give it a real aerodynamic shape. So that is important, that needs to be there. And as I say, it's got the Jaguar face on it as well. You've got extra cooling down at the bottom there. And again, some nice vents at the side that just take the airflow around the side of the wheels as well. You've got your big Jaguar growler, matron, in the middle there, which is fantastic. And as I say, the whole thing just kind of hunkers down. And whilst the front has a real presence about it, it's in the side profile where we really see Callum's genius at work. And it's this line here. You see it? And it runs up over the top of the wheel arch, all the way along, right to the back of the car. This is a stunningly sexy looking car. And I make no apologies for using that word, so I'm sorry if it's offended somebody. Look at the way this thing just curves over there and really hugs down that front wheel. It looks like a cat ready to pounce, obviously. And then you've got this lovely kind of swooping long roofline into this rear spoiler here. The recessed door handles that pop out when you open the car. So its overall shape is unfussy and really stylistic, but it's the details as you go around it where you start to really see the best qualities of the design. This little bit down here, the way these lines come along and then come up there and then mirrored up here, you'll see that all around the rest of the car, like in the rear light signature and the rear spoiler. And it's the way, it's that attention to that detail that I love about this design. And as I say, they market it as an SUV, but I don't think it is. I don't know how to describe the I-Pace really, because it's not a big tall high riding thing like an iX, BMW iX. It's not really an estate car like the Taycan Cross Turismo. It's just like a kind of big sports hatch. Now it does have adaptive air suspension, so you can actually raise the ride height of the I-Pace, and it does have some off-road ability because it is a dual motor car, so therefore it's all-wheel drive. But it's not something you'd go plugging through sort of like, you know, the wilderness in like you maybe would in you know, something like, you know, so the Toyota BZ4X or the Subaru Solterra that we tested the other week. But even so, it's certainly something you could see maybe with a nice set of winter tyres on, taking on a skiing trip, or certainly getting you down a kind of farm track if you live at the end of it. But the design of the whole thing, I just love this car so much. The one thing I will add, however, you've got to have big wheels on it. These are 22-inch alloys on this car, this particular test car. Anything smaller than that looks a little bit under-tired in my eyes. And it's one of those cars, like concept cars, where you see them with these ridiculously big wheels and they never ever make production with them. This is the one car that really does need the big wheels. And it certainly doesn't affect the ride and handling, as we'll see when we drive the car. But let's have a look round the back, because the whole thing truncates into this lovely short rear end. Look at the rear overhang there, there's hardly any of it. The wheels are pushed right out to the extremities of the car, which gives it a really long wheelbase and really good cabin space in a car that's actually quite short overall in comparison with cars as the BMW iX and the Audi e-tron. So that's probably helps give it that real kind of compact nature and that kind of real look. There's a tiny little bit of kind of plastic just there, which is almost like, again, to help a little bit of airflow and to stop sort of the paintwork getting damaged by those big wheels chucking up some bits of debris from it. Right, the rear spoiler, this is what I'm talking about. Can you see that line there? How it just kind of comes up and down. And that's, let's say, it just reminds me of that little section there. And these rear lights, let me see if I can get these to flash, because when they come on, look, there it is there again. You see, that's that side sill section, that bit there that's just mirrored in that rear light. Genius, absolutely brilliant. As I say, it's the attention to detail that stands the car above things like the BMW iX, in my opinion. It's just a wonderful looking car. You've got this little kind of spoiler along here, which you just put in the back just to aid airflow. There's no rear wiper on it, and that does bug me, obviously, because any car that doesn't have a rear wiper does annoy me. But again, like the front, what they've done is they've got a gap there, so as the airflow comes over the roof, the whole thing's designed to take away any excess water and kick it off. Now, as I say, I've driven the car up to Scotland. It was raining the other day when I came up, hence the reason why I've washed the car. Does it work? Sort of. You do get sort of vortices kind of running down there of the water, and as I say, it's in the morning when you're kind of driving out where you need that, if it's defrosted, where you just want to give it a quick clear. But we all know my thoughts on the lack of rear wipers on cars, so I won't labour it. I-Pace badge there, the big bold Jaguar leaper there with the Jaguar badge there, and as I say, it's low set number plate down here. Rear diffuser right down at the bottom. No pretence to being off-road on this car at all, so there's no big chunky wheel arches or any kind of 4x4, if that makes sense. It's sort of like cladding or anything like that. It's just a neat, pretty, good-looking piece of design, in my opinion. But what do you think? If Jaguar launched this car today, would it still turn your heads? Is it still as good-looking a car as it always was? Or am I completely wrong? Are there better looking cars out there? Has Ian Callum designed a better looking car than this? If you take out the Aston Martin Vanquish and DB7? As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. But yes, it's a slinky shape, but that doesn't make it not practical. This boot size is 557 litres as standard, which makes it 57 litres bigger than the BMW iX, which is, as I say, I like the car, but it is a big car, but offers quite a small boot. This is bigger. It's got a 40-40-20 split on the rear seat as standard, and that takes the boot size up to 1,453 litres. The AutoEV suitcases I don't have with me because I'm up visiting my mother and I don't need a suitcase, so I didn't bring them, so apologies. But they do all fit in there because I have tried it. Boot space wise, what other practicalities have we got? Well, we've got little hooks at the side there just to hang bags of shopping in. You've got some good chromed tie-down lashings there, you know, if you need to sort of put a netting down just to keep things hunkered down. And you do get some good underfloor storage for your cables as well. And as well as that, there is also a small space up at the front as well, where you could put sort of like an additional cable in, or I don't know, sort of like a muddy dog lead or whatever you've got with you that you need to put in there, which I'll show you too. Solid rigid parcel shelf, which is very good because it's very secure. But as I say, because of that rear kind of sloping roof line, and obviously with things like the privacy glass as well, it's all kept neat and out of the way. So yes, a very practical car. So up front there is a small space. Not huge, it's not Tesla-like, but it's probably enough, as I say, if you want to put in an additional charging cable. You might get a small kind of bag in there, or I suppose if you're out walking or something, you had a wet gilet or something like that, or a wet jacket, you could pop that in there, or a wet dog lead or whatever. So it's probably just enough for what you might need. Now, rear seat accommodation. Okay, it's not as good as the BMW iX back in here, so I will give it that. But it's still ample. It's still a good place to be. You've got a relatively flat floor. I mean, it's based on, excuse me, based on a brand new platform, or it was at the time of launch. Although, so it doesn't share. It's not a combustion engine platform that's been modified. It's not like an F-Pace that's been changed for it. It's not. But you do have a slight raise there in the middle of the floor there. So that's the only kind of downside. It's not a completely flat floor. However, the upside of that is it doesn't feel like the floor is being pushed up for the outer two passengers, so you actually get a really nice seating position and your legs are nicely down. Now the driver's seat set up for myself, and as you all know, I'm 5'7", 5'8", excuse me, and I've got plenty of legroom back here. Even a middle passenger would be quite comfortable sat in the middle there because the seat is relatively flat across the back. Isofix points, nice and easy to get to. They're covered on the outer two seats. And we've got relatively good storage. So you've got the seat pop, the nets back in there. We've got rear climate control on this particular specification car, with sort of like fan speed and directional adjustment there, and then of course you've got connectivity ports down there, two USB ports and a 12-volt socket as well. So that's all good. There's door bins, although they're not huge, but you probably could fit sort of like a child's water bottle in, but probably not my big one. And you've got that folding armrest down in the centre with an additional two cup holders. And as I say, that middle section, that 20 bit there, the 40-40-20, will fold down as well. So if you've got longer loads like skis or fishing rods or whatever you want to get through, then you certainly can. So as I say, it's not bad back here. Headroom's good. I think if you were taller than me at 6 foot, you'd start to feel a little bit more enclosed in on this side bit, but this massive big glass roof that the car comes with just lets the cabin flood in with light. It is an option, and it depends on the spec you have, and we'll go through that pricing, but it is something I probably would have if I was looking at an I-Pace, because I say it just lets a lot more light into the car. It doesn't open, it just gives it this lovely big glass roof across the whole sort of like ceiling of the car. So yeah, as I say, it's not the biggest in its class. That's probably going to go to things like the iX and the Audi e-tron, but you certainly do not feel shortchanged if you had to do any type of journey back here, whether it's a child or an adult. Now, like the exterior, the interior is a complete departure for a Jaguar if you have envisaged sort of like wood and leather and the smell of cigars and old stale whiskey. It's nothing like that. Again, it's a modern interior. It looks fresh, even 5 years on in my book. Let's start with the driving position. Now, the first thing I'll say is I've now driven the I-Pace with all its seats, if you like, all the different seats you can have in it. And this is the standard sports seats, and these are the ones I would probably choose. You do get performance seats, which was in the car that we had last year when we put it up against the EV6 from Kia, where they've got that kind of one-piece backrest. They're good, they're very nice, I do like them, but I do prefer these sports seats. They've got just a bit more adjustment. You can actually adjust the length of the squab electrically to give you more support there. And they hold you just enough while still giving you that really nice kind of soft, kind of cosseting feel that you would expect from something wearing the Jaguar badge. You face this lovely 3-spoke sports steering wheel that's just nice to hold. It's got the right kind of girth to it, it's the right diameter. 3-spoke design, looks modern, looks fresh. You've got buttons on it which do look touch sensitive, but they're not. You've physically got to press them to make it actually work, which is good as well, which I like. You're straight down into this driver's binnacle, which you can configure depending how you want it. So I've got it set up with 2 dials, and then in the middle you can change the infotainment panel, and it can either be navigation, it can be your driver assistance, trip computer, the media playing, or say back to navigation. You can also have it so that you have just maybe 1 dial in the centre and then media and navigation up there, or again more information about your trip as well. So you can really configure the dashboard how you want it. You move across here now, and that was the biggest change since 2018. I think it was in 2020 the car got the new Jaguar Land Rover Pivi Pro system. So you get this 10-inch touchscreen display, which is good. It's all right. It's fairly quick to respond. It's not the best in the class. It's not as good as BMW's 8th generation operating system, I don't think. Mercedes is probably a little bit better as well, but it's certainly not bad at all, and it feels of good quality. And if you're maybe coming from, I don't know, maybe a Range Rover Sport or something, you're thinking about going all electric, then a lot of that will be familiar to you. You get standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as well, which is wireless. Talking of wireless, that's your wireless charging pad down in there. And then depending on the spec that you go for will depend on your climate control panel. Now, the specs are going to change for the 2024 facelift. This is an older car, so this is an HSE model, and this has got the smaller 5-inch display here. So you've got the climate control system, which is down here. Now you can adjust your airflow with a touch screen. And you can adjust the other sort of things with either touch sensitive buttons round it or by these two rotary controllers, which some people don't like, but I absolutely love. Once you get used to what they do, they work really, really well. So if you don't do anything with them, you just literally turn them, that is your temperature setting. And it feels like a nice bezel on a proper dive watch. That's what I like about it. And again, just everything you touch, the materials used just feel right. Anyway, and then if you push it, that's your seat control. So you've either got the ventilated seat, if it's on option on this car, or go to the right and that's the heated seat. And then just release it and back to 0. And then if you pull it, then that's actually your fan speed. So it really works. Or you can just flick it to auto or turn the climate off. Or you can use the seat heating here on the screen itself, depending on what you want. I think it works. I like the fact it's always there, and once you get used to where the buttons are and how to use it, it is actually quite easy to use on the move. Transmission control here, so drive, neutral, reverse and park. The opposite way around a lever would be, park, reverse, neutral, drive. But again, just get used to it and it's fine. And then you've got different buttons down here, depending obviously what you want. So cruise control, which obviously it operates from up here as well. And then your driver mode's there, traction control off, and then your air suspension adjustment is there. So you can raise and lower the car as well if you're going off-road with it. Storage is good. You get a little slot down in there. 2 cup holders, enough to take my big coffee flask and water bottle, and then a centre cubby in there. You do also get a glove box for the car, which is a decent size, and decent sized door bins. The other thing that's worth mentioning is the mirror. So again, this has got, I think it's called clear sight. So you've either got, it's a bit like the little Honda E, so you've either got a normal mirror, or if you flick it, it now becomes the rear camera display. So it's showing you what's right behind you via the camera. And it works really well, despite where the camera is quite low down in the car. I came up the M6 the other day in really grotty weather, and it still stayed pretty clear, I have to say. I'm not sure what I prefer, whether I just prefer a normal mirror or whether I prefer the camera view, but at least you've got the option of either or if you want. But as I say, the feeling of quality in here is something to be discussed, because again, I appreciate Jaguar maybe haven't had the best reputation when it comes to things like that, but trust me when I tell you this, this feels like a proper premium product car. You've got this lovely kind of sort of like metal round here, which feels nice and cool to the touch. All the controls have got a nice solidity to them, so when you press the buttons or use the column stocks, they click in a really nice way. The materials around, you know, there's not a cheap feeling part. You could maybe argue the sort of like this little bit of plastic down here, or the fact there's a bit of piano black here and there, which you can change, by the way, you can change that veneer, is a little bit old hat and maybe doesn't, sort of like it isn't as modern as you might want it to do. But that would be it. Everything else, you know, soft touch on the dash here, and then there's different kind of leather feeling up here, and then the Alcantara roof lining, and then they say everything you touch, the door controls, everything just has a real proper quality to it that I absolutely love with the Jaguar. The driving position is perfect. You don't have that kind of tall, elevated kind of SUV-like driving thing that you maybe get in things like, you know, like the iX or the Audi e-tron. You sit low in the car, you sit in the Jaguar, not on it. And it's got a real sporty feel to the driving position, which is good, because you'll see that when we drive the car. It just feels right, and it just kind of feels like the whole car kind of envelops itself around you when you're driving it. And that's quite nice, because you've got these two kind of distinctly separate you know, driver and front passenger kind of feel, rather than kind of open cockpit feel. Now, some people do like that. I prefer that kind of more individual side of it, where I feel all the controls are around me. So depending on how you feel, it might not be you, but for me, I think this works. And I think, like the outside, it's one of Jaguar's best interiors that they've ever done. I think it's a real cork, and as I say, it's the feeling of quality, as well as that sort of like real kind of design touch that's abound in here. It's just the same as the outside, and to me, it still feels as fresh as it did the day it was launched 5 years ago. If there's one place the I-Pace is maybe starting to feel its age, it's in its battery system. Now, it's a 90 kilowatt hour battery, which is big, and it should give, according to WLTP figures, a range of 292 miles. But its charging speed is only at 100 kilowatts. meaning that if you're going from your benchmark 10 to 80%, it's going to take around about 45 minutes. Now, obviously more modern cars such as the BMW iX, Kia's EV6, Hyundai's Ioniq 5, two cars which you might also consider given price point, which we'll talk about later. They've got much faster charging speeds. Porsche Taycan 800 volt architecture, its charging speed is much faster. So that is a bit of a downside with the I-Pace. If you stumble across a more likely 50 kilowatt charger, and that takes that 10 to 80% benchmark to about an hour and a quarter. So there is that trade-off to make. If you're charging up from your home 7 kilowatt wall box, then you're looking at around about 13 hours to go from flat to full. But from 2020 onwards, Jaguar did fit an onboard 11 kilowatt charger as standard to the car. So if it's that three-phase electricity that you've got at home, then obviously that time will drop down. Now, I've quoted WLTP figures again, and I am conscious I do quote that a lot. So, and I should really have recorded a bit more of the efficiency on my trip up here, but let me give you a little synopsis of my trip up on Friday. So it's 350 miles, give or take a couple of miles, from my house to my mother's house in Lockerbie, from my house in Surrey to my mother's house in Lockerbie. And I started with a battery level of around about 93%, and it was showing about 232 miles, and I charged twice on the way up to Scotland. So once at Stafford, where the new BP Pulse fast chargers at Stafford services north, and then again at Porsche Centre, South Lakes, and then arrived up in Lockerbie with more, well, I'd probably say it was arrived in Lockerbie with slightly less than 100 miles of range showing. So it's pretty good in terms of its efficiency, considering the weight and the size of the car, and also the fact that I was sitting on a motorway, cruise control on at around about the 70 miles an hour mark, you know, aircon on, Bluetooth music playing, and just constantly on motorway. So it's not bad in fairness. But as I say, it's probably the one area where we need Jaguar to maybe sort of like, you know, the next model that comes out, whether it's a new I-Pace or whether it's the next generation of cars, where I'd really like to see sort of like that electric architecture move into where more of the competition are. Certainly that we've seen from likes of Kia, Hyundai and Porsche now. So are there any surprises for me now that I'm back behind the wheel of an I-Pace? No, but that's a good thing, because it's always been a car that I've absolutely loved to drive, and it's a real driver's car. As I say, I keep kind of just, you know, I can't get my head around this whole SUV thing when Jaguar say, oh, it's an all-electric SUV, and that's kind of how they do market it, in fairness. But if you think of an SUV like a Land Rover Discovery, or even things like the BMW iX, Mercedes-Benz EQC 400, Audi e-tron, that's not the I-Pace. It's difficult to describe, and it's probably why I love the Taycan Cross Turismo so much, because it's a similar type of car. It doesn't feel like some big bulky thing. It feels like something lithe, something that's a bit more dynamic, something that you can really take by the scruff of the neck and throw it down a twist. An Audi e-tron and a BMW iX, as good as they are, would not see the way an I-Pace went down a twisty road. They wouldn't even know where it had gone. Now, in terms of power, when it came out back in 2018, it probably felt like 400 horsepower, which is what the I-Pace has and still has, was a lot of power. And to all intents and purposes, it is. Its 0 to 60 time is around about 4.5 seconds. It is a fast car, but it is so much more than just fast. It's the way in which it delivers the power. It's the way in which the car actually makes you feel as a driver. Now, Jaguar have always had, I mean, grace, space and pace was always their mantra way back in the 60s. And I don't think there's a Jaguar that better applies to than the I-Pace, if I'm honest with you, because you've got quite a commodious car, and because of its quietness, because of its refinement, it can be quite corny as it sounds, graceful, and my gosh, it does pick up its skirts and goes when you need it to. Let's talk about the driving dynamics of it from the driving seat. So the first thing that you notice is the steering, or the first thing I certainly notice is the steering. It is perfect. To me, it is the perfect weight of a steering. It's got a precision to it that I've found lacking a lot of newer EVs. You know exactly where the front wheel is. You go for an Apex and an I-Pace and you can get it millimetre perfect as far as I'm concerned. It's got just the right amount of heft to it. It's not too heavy, but it's just that, you pitch into a bend like this and it's just that roll of the wrist and there you've got it. And you know exactly what the front wheels are doing. So that's the first thing that really speaks to me, is the way the steering acts with you. It's got a real kind of old-fashioned kind of mechanical feel to it, and it's got a real kind of performance car feel to it. The second thing that really sort of like grabs you when you're driving the I-Pace is the suspension and the chassis dynamics. Now, chassis engineering to me is a dark art. I sort of understand it in terms of what you have to try and achieve. Could I do it myself? Absolutely no way. And to me, there are certain people that need to be held up on pedestals when it comes to chassis engineers. Richard Parry Jones, God rest his soul, who engineered the first Mondeo, he was one. Mike Cross, who did this, he's the other, because he has got this spot on as far as I am concerned. There is the right amount of feel coming from the chassis, balanced with the right amount of comfort. Now, I'm not saying that you don't feel the bumps. You do. It's primary ride. You know exactly what the road surface is like. You could put a pea down on this road and I could drive over it and I could tell you where it was. But that doesn't make it uncomfortable. It's secondary ride. The damper tuning on this car is phenomenal. It doesn't float, it doesn't bounce, it just stays absolutely resolutely flat. And as a driver, you know exactly what is going on underneath you. And the blend of the performance, the steering, and that, as far as I'm concerned, adds up to a car that is absolutely unsurpassed in its class. If you class it just as those big SUVs, you throw the Taycan into the mixture and it's another car the same as this. It's just got that blend that just, for me, feels right, absolutely right. Driving modes, there's three. You get Eco, Comfort and Dynamic, and that's down here. I don't bother with Eco and anything like that. You flick it into Dynamic, and you put your foot down, and yes, you can feel it. Of course you can. As I say, there's that. 400 horsepower is not a small amount of power, but kind of when you've got hot hatches that are kind of getting on that sort of like level now, and obviously with the added weight of an EV, it's not the startling figure that you get in, say, something like a BMW iX-M60. And as much as I like the iX-M60, and I do like it, it doesn't drive like this. This just kind of shrinks round you as a driver. This kind of makes you feel like you're really making stuff happen. And I just love it. I really do. I don't think there's another car in its class that comes even close to the blend of abilities that the I-Pace has. Anyway, there we go. So 3 driving modes. Comfort's a nice one. I've pretty much kept it in comfort on this trip to Scotland and back, because that's the other thing about it. When you're on the motorway with the car, it just settles down and it's a really comfortable place to be. You know, a 6.5 hour drive just goes past and you don't even know you've done it. The brakes are good. I like the brakes as well, and again, it's a bit like the steering. When you're not using the regen, and there is an adjustable regen in it, but you have got to go into the screen. There's not paddles. That's maybe one thing I'd quite like to have seen, is just a bit more accessibility to that adjustability. Anyway, the brakes themselves are really, really good. They've got a nice, the pedal retardation is lovely. You push on the pedal and it really makes you feel like you're actually stopping the car. It doesn't feel artificial. It feels like you're part of the driving experience. When you do go into the brake regen system itself, there's not a huge amount of adjustment. It's certainly not one pedal driving, but it does draw you up, and then you just use the brake for that kind of final thing. And then there's a hold function. Obviously, when you stop to set a traffic lights, you just hold it and it'll hold it on the brakes for you, so you don't have to have your foot on the pedal all the time, which is quite nice. The driving position, as I said earlier, is pretty much perfect for me. I know I'm not a particularly tall man, and everything just feels like it's all nicely encompassed around me. There isn't the centre console which kind of comes up. It doesn't touch my knee, so there's enough gap there as well. I don't feel like I'm encroached into with the centre console. I feel like I've got enough space, but I also feel like I'm really kind of cocooned into the driving environment itself. The steering wheel, as I said, is the perfect size. It's got a nice girth to it, and that just helps as well. And I like the fact that it's round. It's not like you've got a flat bottom. It's a nice round steering wheel. So when I've really sort of like got sort of like getting a kind of hustle on, I've got this real kind of tactility with the steering wheel that I love in a car, and it's perfect. The refinement is good. There are better cars than it, if I'm honest with you. There is a tiny little bit of wind noise you can sometimes hear from the car, depending obviously on the type of weather that you're driving in as well. But to most people, you're not going to find this a noisy car. This car's got the big wheels on it. It's got the 22-inch alloy wheels. On harsher surfaces, you do get a tiny bit of tyre noise. It's not imperceptible. You can hear it. You know that you're on a hard surface. You don't feel it through the suspension or the tyres itself, but you do get a little bit of road roar from them. I've not driven an I-Pace on the smallest tyres, if I'm honest with you, so I can't really comment on whether it's much of a difference to that. But if I'm being fair, I'd put up with it to have the look of the 22s on this car, because I think it looks sensational on them. So I'm willing to put up with a tiny bit of road noise for a car that looks as good as this one does. And that's it. As a whole, it's a 5-year-old car in terms of its design and its engineering, and it feels as fresh out of the box as the day it was when they launched it. I absolutely love this car. As I say, I've always held it up as a bit of a yardstick, and to me the only car that's come close and has surpassed it a bit, in my view, is that Taycan. But you will not feel shortchanged in this car at all. It's real. When we did the review last year, when we looked at the I-Pace as a used car against the Kia EV6 as a new car, there was a lot of comments that we had from you guys saying how you could really see the reason why we did it, why we compared the two cars, because there was a real comparison with them. You could almost see like an inspiration from Kia when it came to the EV6. And I think, when you think about flattery, that's what they say, the imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I think they have flattered Jaguar well with the EV6, because this thing, what a yardstick to have. I love it. Now, let's talk about price for a minute here, because this is a bit of a strange area for Jaguar at the moment. And the reason being is they're having a bit of a re-evaluation of the company and where they're actually going to be in the future. And they see themselves as pushing way up market, almost as, like, say, a Bentley rival. And I'm not sure that's a good move, personally. This is not an inexpensive car, but nor is it ridiculously priced either in some respects. Now, the range starts at the moment at just under £70,000 for a base SE. As I say, the trim levels are going to change with the 2024 car that comes out later this year. But this is an HSE, and this is £75,000 base. This car's optioned up to just under £86,000, which I admit is not cheap, but considering that you've got BMW iXs which you can easily spec up to over £100,000, it's not ridiculously out of the ballpark either as well. And the same with the Audi e-tron S. I know the Q8's just about to come out as well, but when we tested the Audi e-tron S, which I don't think is a patch on an I-Pace, that was well into six figures as well for that car. So I don't think the Jaguar's way out of the ballpark in terms of pricing. My issue with them being is the company's perception of where they are. Now, maybe I'm wrong, because these days it's very easy to option a Range Rover, which obviously is part of the same company, up to £250,000, very, very easily. I'm not sure Jaguar has that image just yet to be able to charge that sort of price, because Jaguar's always been seen as, not a value brand, but they've always been seen as pretty good value for money in terms of what you get. Way back when the E-Type was launched, for instance, it was faster, drove better and had better handling than an Aston Martin DB4, its equivalent from Aston, and it was half the price of the Aston. So they've always been seen as that sort of just, you know, that kind of good value for money in comparison with better cars, or cars that have a better perceived image, dare I suggest. So by pushing the price of these Jaguars up, I'm yet to be convinced, but I'm happy to be proved wrong if they've got a plan up their sleeve. But as it is, I think in terms of its price point, the Jaguar is bang on where it should be, and it certainly feels worth the money in my book. Now, servicing of the car as well, that's not too bad. So you're looking at every 2 years or every 21,000 miles, whichever comes sooner. The only downside is at the moment in the UK as standard, the car only gets a 3-year warranty. But do check the website, depending obviously when you're buying, if you're looking at the I-Pace, because sometimes there are some deals on, and Jaguar do things like free servicing and free warranties on certain of the cars, or sorry, free extended warranties. So before you do push the button, make sure that may be within a sort of like a campaign that's going on as well. So do ask the question on that. And in terms of competition, well, I've mentioned quite a few of them already while we've been chatting. So BMW iX. The new kind of flagship SUV from BMW, and I do like that car. It's controversial looking, but it drives brilliantly, so I do like the iX, and it is worthy of having a look at it as well. Now, Audi's e-tron's never been one of my favourite cars. I think the car looks fantastic, but I've always found a bit of a letdown to drive, and it's in terms of its efficiency. However, they've just revised the car, and it's now the new Q8 e-tron, where they've put a big emphasis on battery technology and efficiency as well, and we've yet to drive it. So we have to be fair and say that is going to be a big competitor as well for the I-Pace. Mercedes have got the EQC 400, and again, price point wise, it is a comparable car to the Jaguar. But like the Jaguar, it's kind of been abound for a few years, but unlike the Jaguar, I think it's starting to feel its age a little bit, if I'm being honest with you. Now, if you look at a much bigger car, Volvo's going to enter the marketplace with the new EX90. But again, I think in terms of its size, and it's a 7-seater car, would you consider it instead of an I-Pace? I'm not sure. I think if you need that space, that's the car you'll look at, and you won't consider an I-Pace. But in terms of price point, that's what's coming onto the marketplace too. Porsche's Taycan Cross Turismo and Sport Turismo. Now, I think they're probably real direct rivals to this car because they've got similar levels of space, similar levels of performance and handling as well, depending on the trim level you look at in the Taycan. So that's certainly a competition. And again, if you weren't looking at the Cross Turismo and Sport Turismo body styles, because you don't need the extra practicality, then again, you'd have to also maybe include the Audi e-tron GT in that. So in terms, say, of a driver's car, if that's what you're looking for, they're going to be rivals for the I-Pace as well, and pretty much up there too. But we're also seeing car brands that we maybe haven't considered before moving into this market space. Now, if you're a regular viewer of AutoEV, you'll know that last year we did a twin test, a new versus used twin test, where we pitched the Jaguar I-Pace as a used car against a brand new Kia EV6, which to all intents and purposes, if you look at the design of it, follows a very similar route to the I-Pace. But if you're looking at new cars, then Kia have got the EV6 GT that's coming out, well over 500 brake horsepower. As I say, similar ethos in terms of its design, packaging and usability as the I-Pace, with a real focus on its performance and handling. So that you're going to consider as a rival. And if you look at that car, then maybe over the £70,000 bracket, you might also look at things like the Ford Mustang Mach-E GT. Again, another kind of performance-orientated, not quite big SUV, but kind of crossover style SUV, similar to the I-Pace, that also could fit into this price bracket. So there is a lot out there to consider, and it's whether or not we feel the I-Pace is still worthy enough to be considered instead of one of those cars we've just mentioned. So here's what we like and what we don't like about the Jaguar I-Pace. Well, we love its styling, its dynamics, its interior design and fit and finish, the performance on offer, and it still has a relatively decent range. We don't like the charging rate should be better in terms of newer competition, and therefore its electrical architecture does lag some of its rivals. And it can get some quite pricey depending obviously on trim level and options that you choose. I really wasn't sure how to approach this road test review. I had a couple of different ideas that were really quirky and really different. And when I spoke to the guys, Rod and Charlie back at the office, and I said, what do you think? As I say, it was Rod said, look, he said, you've always held the I-Pace up as this sort of like real sort of like yardstick, you know, against, you know, all the other EVs. He said, but he said, you haven't driven one for a while, then maybe it's time to really sort of like get behind the wheel of one and do a proper big road trip and just see, after all the other EVs that we've driven since we last had an I-Pace, whether or not it's still that yardstick. And as I've said, it is in some respects, but I do still think the Porsche Taycan Cross Turismo is now my EV of choice, money no object. But that doesn't make the I-Pace a bad car. In fact, in terms of its class, in terms of the BMW iX, in terms of the Audi e-tron, admittedly we've not driven the EQ8 e-tron yet, and the Mercedes-Benz EQC, I still think the I-Pace is the one to have. Now, I've done a good few hundred, if not 1,000 miles in I-Paces now since they've been out. And I've used them day to day, I've used them to do school run, I've used them to go to business meetings, I've used them to go on holiday, and I've used them to do big road trips. And there's not a scenario where I've not been in it, where I've been in it and I've not thought it's not coping admirably with this situation. It's a real Swiss Army knife of a car, I think, this, because it's not some big hulking SUV. It's not some small compromise like hatchback. It's got a decent enough range. Its efficiency is okay. If that charging speed was a bit better, it would be almost untouchable in some respects for the type of car that it is. But more than that, more than any of all of that, it's the way it makes me feel when I drive it. This is, as I said, a real line in the sand moment for Jaguar, and I'm a bit concerned of where the brand is about to go, because they say in 2 years' time they're saying they're going to be all electric, and so far this is still the only all electric car that they've got out. I just hope that that line in the sand moment is the start of it and certainly not the finish line of it. Jaguar has got such a sort of illustrious history with it. But let me tell you something, let me paraphrase my old boss, Dr. Ulrich Betz, who's the CEO of Aston Martin. And he once said to us in a conference that history without a future is just that, it's history. But history with a future ahead of it is heritage. And I hope that is what we can now apply to Jaguar, because I hope the future is bright for the company, because to let something as good as this go to waste would be, and into the history books without a future, would be a dying shame. Thank you for watching yet another episode of AutoEV, and thank you for joining me back in my hometown of Lochmaben in Scotland. Please remember to make sure you are subscribed to the channel. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure that you do give it a bit of a thumbs up, and also press the bell button down below, because in that way you'll be notified of when our next video goes live. If you have enjoyed the video and you want to tell us about your experiences with the Jaguar I-Pace, or you think that maybe I'm wrong, which is not unheard of, just ask my ex-wife, then by all means please put some comments down below and let us know your experiences of the Jaguar I-Pace. If you've bought a car on the basis of one of our road test reviews as well, can you please let us know that? Because, as I say, it makes us feel a bit warm and fuzzy inside. It makes us realise that we're doing not too bad a job. And if this has just whetted your appetite for a bit more from a silly old Scotsman talking about electric cars, then stick on the YouTube channel, because there's well over 100 videos now, not just road test reviews, but twin tests, electric icons, used car reviews, van reviews, and even motorbike reviews from our guest presenter, Charlie Boorman. We're also across all social media platforms as well, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, God, we're even on TikTok now, we're down with the kids, so we are pretty much everywhere. So, if you are a fan, make sure you're following us. Thank you once again, as I say, for watching us. I hope to see you soon.